Hello everybody, good morning. Thank you for the Pender community and others from further afield for joining us today for this important session. I really want to acknowledge and thank Claire Fraser for organizing our guests here today.
So many of you know me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a biologist that works primarily on wild salmon, but I stray into coastal ecology because salmon are connected to other species through habitats and food webs. And the organization that I work for, Raincoast Conservation Foundation, is coming to these issues from the perspective that the conservation of our biological assets is our greatest investment, and sound decision making is based on good science and also the ethics of species conservation. So many of you are familiar with this image, but the concept of the Salish Sea as an integrated headwaters to deep waters ecosystem is really a recent perspective that evolved out of a growing understanding from marine science that said that Georgia Strait and Puget Sound and the Strait of Juan de Fuca were better understood as one interconnected coastal sea that shares species, fresh and salt water, and habitats. And with that, there's been a growing recognition of this unique area and the diversity of fish, mammal, bird, and invertebrate species that occupy its waters. So I'm just going to touch on some of the drivers of this diversity because it's part of the reason that this area is unique, and sensitive to large-scale changes. So a key driver of biological diversity in the Salish Sea is that diverse geography creates diverse habitats. And from soft river deltas like the Fraser to rocky reefs to shallow embayments and to open or deep water habitats and coastal fjords, these habitats offer different conditions, different structures, and different processes. And as such, they provide specific conditions for specific animals at specific life stages. And we see this in eelgrass nurseries that are used by larval and juvenile stages of fish. We see it in sandy beaches that are used by forage fish like smelts and sandlance for spawning. We see it in kelp forests that are used by rockfish and other fish communities, and rock walls and reef habitats that are used by invertebrates and other fish communities. But it's not just fish, it's all marine species who are adapted to live in the unique conditions of their specific habitats. And again, we see this with gray whales feeding in these soft sediments. We see it in migratory shorebirds and seabirds that refuel in intertidal estuaries. And we see it in pelagic animals that hunt or feed in deep and open water habitats. Diverse geography creates diverse habitats and processes which enable diverse species. Another unique aspect of the Salish Sea is that underlies its diversity is that it is a coastal sea that lies on the continental shelf. And these areas are rare. They make up less than 8% of the global ocean, but they contribute inordinately to global productivity, so plankton production. And productivity right here in Georgia Strait, from the Fraser estuary through to East Point, Boundary Pass, and Turn Point, is the base of a food web with ecological connections that extend thousands of kilometers into the Pacific Ocean through the movements of migratory birds, fish, and mammals. That's how important this region is. But if the inherent value of habitats isn't a motivator for conservation like it is for me, it's also possible to put a dollar value on ecosystems. And this concept of ecosystem goods and services are really the benefits that nature freely provides to us that we rely on and that we can't live without. And these services include everything from pollination to flood control, water filtration, climate regulation, and they're the benefits that often go unnoticed and we take them for granted. Researchers at the David Suzuki Foundation examined the value of aquatic shorelines in the lower mainland, and they found that these habitats provide between $30 and $60 billion a year in ecosystem goods and services. And when looking at the land around the Georgia Basin, again, nature's benefits provided an estimated $5.5 billion a year. And the same with Puget Sound. Work down there has shown the value of their ecological assets, and they looked into things like nutrient cycling and recreation and a really broad sweep of of indicators, and they value their ecosystems between $10 and $80 billion a year. So the pressure on marine habitats in the Salish Sea is huge, and a lot of that comes from the fact that there are 8 million of us living in this region. But specific intense industrialization is occurring in estuaries and shorelines to accommodate these terminal expansions. And these activities have replaced or degraded original habitats, the features and processes that species rely on, and there's also a growing awareness and understanding of the concomitant impacts from shipping traffic and the ships themselves, regardless of where they are. So there's people in this room that know more about these increased shipping proposals than I do, and Christiane's here from Georgia Strait Alliance and Alexander from CPAWS, who are really familiar with these issues. But I'm just going to go through a quick list of the major expansion processes that are planned, and I don't have some projects on this list. So 574 increase in tanker traffic from Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain, 300% increase in container traffic into ports around Vancouver, 25% increase in bulk cargo traffic, 640 coal barges proposed per year out of Fraser Surrey docks, another 52 out of Neptune and Burrard Inlet, plus we've got proposals from LNG's Wood Fibre Discovery, Westpac and Steelhead, plus there's also proposals that are coming from the US, plus there's also like tankers going into Vancouver Airport for jet fuel, and there's cruise ship increases, and there's other freighter increases. So there's a lot of implications associated with these proposals, and they range from local to regional to global, and they have social, economic, cultural, and environmental considerations. In the case of these carbon-based energy products, many contend that this is also a moral issue, and some may contend that ethics and sustainability issues permeate all of these shipping proposals. But in the 2 minutes that I have left, I want to speak to one ecological aspect of what increased shipping means for one group of animals, and that's southern resident killer whales. So these whales are sentinels for the ecological health of the Salish Sea, and their social, cultural, and economic significance cannot be underestimated. Despite more than 15 years protected as an endangered species under our Canadian and US laws, these whales are not recovering. But we collectively have a profound influence over their fate because it's our actions that affect all of the factors that threaten their survival. And that's the abundance of salmon food supply, Chinook primarily, the quality of that salmon in terms of its pollutant loads, and the levels of underwater noise that compromise their ability to find and catch those salmon. So our recent population viability analysis, which is the most comprehensive population analysis of these whales to date, measured the role that each of these threats, so Chinook abundance, pollutants, and acoustic disturbance, have on southern resident killer whale recovery. And what our analysis showed is that these whales are really on a fulcrum, and they can't sustain further stressors. Further reductions in their food supply or increases in vessel noise put these whales on a trajectory towards extinction. The Salish Sea cannot get any noisier or Chinook abundance decline any further if these whales are to recover. But importantly, the reverse is also true, and increases in Chinook salmon and reductions in noise can put whales on a positive trajectory towards recovery. But food supply alone could not stimulate population recovery as much as food supply and noise combined together. The combination of noise reduction and increased food supply put the whales on a trajectory that would actually meet the US recovery target. Canada doesn't have a recovery target, so we rely on the US one. And importantly, we know that just one of those shipping proposals, Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain, is enough increased noise to put the killer whales into a negative population trajectory. So, last slide. This is just one species that we're talking about, and I've just talked about, or I've just talked about the effects from noise. What I haven't mentioned is the increased risk of accidents and oil spills, other shipping impacts, or other species. I also haven't identified any of the human health, social, or economic considerations. Additionally, and importantly, these proposed expansions are being viewed on an individual basis. No one is examining these proposals from the perspective of their cumulative impacts and how they affect ecosystems, economies, cultures, and values of the Salish Sea. So the Port of Vancouver has been putting a lot of effort into its ECHO program to better understand the impacts of sound on cetaceans, and I highly commend them for this, and it will likely yield important information. But here's the catch. The Port is proposing that these projects go ahead with no adequate consideration of cumulative effects, with known impacts to endangered whales that can't be adequately mitigated, and proposing that we study these impacts while pushing these whales several steps closer to extinction. We should keep killer whales as more than just memories for future generations, and this is true for all biological communities in the Salish Sea. As such, we need to fully understand the implications of these projects, and we need to engage constituents and science teams that can identify the risks, the costs, and the benefits. And until this is determined, there just isn't the social license for these projects to proceed. So that's it.
Thank you.
And,
hello, yeah, so my name is Wellstood, and I'm the Director of Marine Operations Security, and I'm also the Harbour Master for the Port of Vancouver. And what I wanted to do today is to give you a little insight into traffic trends and projected traffic volumes going forward. So first, just a little bit about ourselves. We're a federal entity, we're accountable to the Federal Minister of Transportation. We get our mandate, our purpose directly from the Canada Marine Act, and that states that our mandate is to focus on national trade objectives. We as a port authority do not get to decide what gets traded. That is what the federal government does. We are just here to ensure that it's done in a safe and environmentally responsible manner, and while doing so we have to take into account community consideration. So as a port authority, as an entity, we have a mission, and the mission is to enable Canada's trade objective ensuring safety, environmental protection, and of course consideration for local communities. And this translates into a long-term vision and then to be the world's most sustainable port. So what does that mean? World's sustainable port, most sustainable port means a careful balance between a healthy environment, thriving communities, and economic prosperity through trade. So if I focus on the trade aspect, for us that means Canadian products traded through the Asia-Pacific gateway. So Canadian goods traded through the Port of Vancouver with Asia. And you see on this slide, Canada trades their predominantly natural commodities, grain, sulfur, potash, lumber to China, and we get the consumer goods back in containers, or Chinese-made, or let's say Asian-made cars that come back into the Canadian market. So we basically have 5 different business sectors within the Port of Vancouver. On the left you see the bulk commodities, anything you can store, grain, potash, sulfur. The break bulk, that's lumber, steel, project cargoes. The automobiles, the containers, that's where all the consumer goods come back from Asia. And then the tourism industry on the cruise. So, when talking about deep sea shipping developments, I actually cooked up this image, and it's an image of a CPR vessel back in the 1940s going through the Lions Gate Bridge, and a cruise vessel going through it in 2050. And you notice that the bridge is still the same size, but the vessels have a significant increase in size. And it's a very telling picture. And the actual increase in vessel size is also what brings the economies of scale. So you're able, when it comes to bulkers and container vessels, you're able to move more cargo with one vessel. I would compare it with the car pooling, car sharing, or taking public transit. Instead of having 10 cars on the road, you now have one bus on the road. So I have an interesting graph here that shows the shipping trend from 1996 to 2016. And I just noticed that this is actually not the graph that I was planning on putting in there, because there's a break point in this graph around 2007 when the 3 port authorities in the Lower Mainland amalgamated into one port authority. So I have to qualify it a little bit. So the blue line, and you see the figures on the left side in blue. That's the total tonnage that was pushed through, or that was traded through the ports, the 3 port authorities combined. So up to 2007, this represented foreign going cargo, so deep sea vessels. As of 2007, Port of Vancouver at the time, and the Port of Vancouver, we started to include domestic cargo also in the figures. And that it represents about 30 million metric tons per year on domestic cargo. So the line is still the same line. You just basically have to take 30 million metric tons off of it to get to foreign trade, but you still see that divergence happening at this point in time. So I had 3 qualifiers in this. What you see, and the yellow line is the total vessel call line. Foreign vessels visiting the Port of Vancouver. So back in 1996, we had around about 3,200 foreign vessels visiting the Port of Vancouver. That peaked in the year 2000 to about 3,700 foreign vessel calls. And that came to a low of about 2,700 in 2009. So it's basically the economic downturn. And in 2015, 2016, we're back up at the 3,150 foreign vessel calls. So as you can see, it's basically been very stable and constant. It actually has declined if you compare it to the year 2000. And there's a reason for it. But you see the tonnage throughput, so the development within the port area and the tonnage throughput has increased. And the reason for that is that vessels have become bigger and have been able to take more tonnage. So a lot of the smaller vessels have been retired, larger vessels have come online, and you get more efficiency in shipping cargo throughout the jurisdiction. So you ship more cargo with the same amount of vessels. So in 2006, the new Panama Canal was announced, and the new Panama Canal is wider, allows for wider vessels, longer vessels. So that was a sort of a signal to the shipping industry, the shipbuilding industry, to start retiring the smaller vessels to order the larger vessels. And then what you see happening in 2007, it was just before the economic downturn happened in 2008, is that there was a huge surge in commodity prices. So prices for natural commodities, grain, potash, coal, sulfur, they all went through the roof. Which basically now shippers, they could get a good price for it overseas to hire these really big vessels to ship a lot of these commodities. So that is where you see the vessel numbers go down, but the cargo numbers go up. Yeah, I need to hurry. And then in 2008, the economic crisis hit, so the number of vessels that were scrapped or laid up or parked went down. And then here you see the recovery, and then the vessels recovered. So basically, tonnage increased, but the vessels did not. So, yeah, what happened? Larger vessels became larger and were able to take more cargo. Island anchorages. So what I did here, there are 2 different graphs, and there are 2 different colors. If you have a color slide that they look the same. This is the same, the shipping trend, so the domestic vessels calling on the Port of Vancouver. This is what happened to the island anchorage assignments from the Port of Vancouver, so the vessels that were sent to the island anchorages. And in 2009, we had about 30 vessels that were sent to island anchorages, or that utilized the island anchorages. And that went up in 2010, we went even further than it declined a bit, and it went up, and it reached its peak around about 2013 to 2014. And what had happened there is in 2009 we were at the bottom of the economic crisis, so it was really rock bottom, there were not a lot of vessels moving. 2010 there was an economic recovery, so you can see that vessels started to pick up. 2011 we noticed that there was a lot of vessels going to island anchorage. We're around about 120. So as a port community, Chamber of Shipping, the pilots, the PPA, the Port Authority, we established an anchorage committee to talk about these anchorages and to look into what was the root cause of utilization of the island anchorage. We came up with some solutions. Anchorage improvements within our port. We expanded the anchorages within the port's jurisdiction. We came up with some other mechanisms, and that actually reduced the need for island anchorages. That went okay until the Canadian report in 2013 got dissolved. And that's sort of a wrench in the supply chain of grain. And when we talk about vessels going to anchorages, container vessels don't use anchorages as a rule, tankers don't, car carriers don't, cruise vessels don't, it's bulk carriers. And bulk carriers is predominantly grain bulkers. So it's Canadian grain that needs to move to Asia, comes through the port of Vancouver. These are the ones that are utilizing the anchorages. If I look at the anchorages within my jurisdiction, 70–80% is grain bulkers waiting for cargo. So what happened in 2014? We had about 180 vessels going to island anchorages. At that point in time, it was the first year after the Canadian report was dissolved. It was a very, very severe winter, and there was a bumper crop coming off the prairies. This very severe winter poses a challenge for the trains. Trains going through the Rockies have to be split in half if the temperature goes, I believe it's -40 or something, and that has to do with, from a technological perspective, they can't pull these longer trains. So there were inefficiencies in the supply chain, and the inefficiencies in the supply chain caused the issues. The port decided to do an anchorage study, which we finalized to look into the root causes this time. A big study, and based on that we implemented changes to our anchorage procedure to improve the fluidity of the supply chain. And in the 2016 figures, and we're basically done with the 2016 year, we're basically around about up to the 30–40 vessels, and we're pretty confident that they will stay that way. So two pictures. Grain supply chain is basically the root cause of the utilization of island anchorages. And then I have another one here on the projected total vessel calls, and the previous presenter made some inroads into that. 2015 we're at 3,200 vessel calls. That won't go up with everything that is projected for the Port of Vancouver that is on the books will go ahead and gets to full capacity. You see another 1,000 vessel calls in the coming 10 years up to 2026. So another 1,000 vessel calls per year. That means, and I'll put them all three on there, that in 2000 we had 10 vessel calls a day. So it means there were 10 vessels coming in to this area and going to the port, and 10 vessels going out. Today it's 9 vessels a day coming in, 9 vessels going out. In 2026 that would mean 12 vessels coming in, 12 vessels going out. So compared to 2000, that's 2 vessels coming in, 2 vessels going out into this jurisdiction for the port of Vancouver. Just wanted to sort of put that in perspective. And then my last slide is back to our vision, the most sustainable port in the world. It's a balance between thriving communities, healthy environment, and economic prosperity through trade.
I don't have a presentation. I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you, and I'll just speak to some remarks today. And really do want to thank you really for the opportunity actually to fly over here and be able to fly over the island on a morning that beats a day in the office. Maybe I'll start quickly with the presence of Transport Canada in the region, just to contextualize for you who we are and what our mission is. We are mandated by multiple acts of Parliament and the Canada Transportation Act to ensure, to the best of our ability, that Canada has a safe, secure, clean, and efficient transportation system across all modes: air, surface, which federally primarily means rail, and marine. We have in the Pacific region at any given time approximately 500 staff located at about 15 locations, including the 4 airports that we own and operate in the province. The bulk of that staff is inspectors, actually, every day inspecting our transportation system. And I have the honor of overseeing that in this region. We're here today to talk about marine, so if you'll forgive me, I'm going to state a little bit of the obvious and just do a bit of a background contextual piece on the marine environment in which we regulate and in which we operate. So first, it may seem a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but marine is an international, it's a global activity. It sounds an obvious fact, but I highlight it because it affects the international nature of the activity, has implications for how we oversee and regulate that activity, and how how we apply our jurisdiction, and there are constraints to that. In effect, for many shipping matters, Canada cannot govern alone. We do not operate in isolation from others. Shipping can only operate effectively if the regulations and standards themselves are agreed to, adopted and implemented on an international basis. The International Maritime Organization, headquartered in London, is where this process takes place, and Transport Canada is our country's representative at the IMO. They're advocating and representing Canada's interests and ensuring that we are aligned with the positions that are adopted globally for marine safety. In this context, Canada is a signatory to over 50 international conventions on a range of shipping matters. It's very complex to implement these. The way we enforce them domestically is under the Canada Shipping Act of 2001. I'm certainly not going to go through all 50 of these different conventions with you, as fascinating as that would be to spend a day on. It would try even my patience on an island. But just a few of them that you might have heard of. And many of them date a long time. This is an institution with a lot of history. So one of them is the Safety of Life at Sea, which was one of the first conventions. It's called SOLAS, that's how it's commonly known. And it dates back to the Titanic. And it sets out safety standards for vessel construction and emergency equipment and lifeboats and firefighting. Now, I had a relative on the Titanic, so it's kind of neat that something stems from that far back and came out of that disaster. Another one that would be of interest to you is called MARPOL, which is the short for marine pollution, which sets limits on discharges from bilges, sewage, air emissions, anything that's emitted from a ship, as well as the pollution equipment on board the vessel to regulate the discharge of that. It's also the convention through which the requirement for double hull tankers was implemented, for example. There are also standards for training, certification, watchkeeping, that go to the expertise of the crew and how that is enforced and overseen. And Transport Canada has inspectors who deal with these three through a variety of mechanisms, plus the other 47. And we actually then, in turn, have conventions that go to how we oversee those, such as the Tokyo or Paris MOUs and what we call the Port State Control Program that allows us to share risk information on vessels of concerns so that with all of our allies, when a vessel is identified as high risk, we ensure that it gets a special inspection treatment at whatever its next port of entry is, and that they don't sail until they're safe. So what I'm trying to describe is that there's a vast sort of global web of regulatory schema and domestic legislation in each country with inspections and oversight regimes to ensure that the global maritime industry operates safely and securely. So in this context, I've got some friends at the table here, and they'll speak to their different roles. But while Transport is the overarching regulator for marine shipping and transport in Canada, we do rely on our partners heavily on the operational side. So I'll just walk through a couple of those roles for you so you get a sense of some of the things that are going on behind the scenes that most of us just don't focus our attention on. First, and I was out yesterday actually with our Deputy Minister at Esquimalt Military Base, where we run something called the Marine Security Operations Center with embedded partners. Really dark room in a cellar, very secure, lots of ways, very few ways to get in, lots of trouble you can get into if you try. They receive what we call 96-hour reports. So before a vessel can enter Canadian waters, 4 days out, it has to call ahead and notify transport that it's headed our way so that our safety system can prepare and monitor for its arrival. And that's on the transport side, it's on the dangerous goods side, it's the contents of the vessel and the containers which go to the ports and the communities, it's the passenger manifest so that our border services agency can check the people and the goods that are coming in, it's our agriculture department so that we can check if that's if there's stuff coming in that would be a concern from that perspective. It's Fisheries and Oceans, it's CBSA, it's the RCMP. All the stuff we have out there, we're collecting and gathering information. We try to push our perimeters as far out as we can so that if risk occurs, we deal with it before something gets into our waters. Once a vessel enters Canadian waters at the 200 nautical mile economic exclusion zone, more measures come into place to ensure the safe passage of that vessel as it approaches our coastal waters. The Coast Guard, Tim is one of mine, but working with the Coast Guard right now, maintains an extensive system of aids to navigation. Probably many of you are boaters will rely on those. to help mariners determine position and course, to warn of dangers and obstructions, or to mark the location of preferred routes. It's supposed to use like charts and buoys, but obviously it's a more complex regime. And at the pinnacle of complexity and sophistication, Dan is going to talk to us about the Nanaimo system today. So to mitigate the navigation risk posed by our unique coastline, marine pilots go on board, and they've got the local expertise. Let me tell you, I'm glad I don't have to try to pass that exam. For those of you who have had that described to you, it's an incredibly onerous process and effectively a lifetime journey to become qualified as a pilot in our coastal waters in terms of the detailed local knowledge that you have to have in technical expertise. So there's at least one pilot on board every vessel coming into our coast. So between the Coast Guard, the Pilotage Authority, and the local ports, they implement a variety of policies at the national level that are tied to the international. They're adding local expertise, there's technology, there's training, there's certification, there's regulation, there's oversight, ultimately, and foresight. And this web comes together to ensure that we're safe, that we're secure, and that we're clean. And technology is getting better and better all the time, and it's helping to reduce human error and to address skills. There are also requirements for LTAGs to be escorted when going through certain areas, such as Strait and Boundary Pass into the Port of Vancouver. Harbour masters have all sorts of powers to address risk, and we surveil. Transport Canada has a national surveillance plane. We call it the MASP. It's painted bright red. It says surveillance on it. It buzzes ships, which apparently sometimes scares them, but we fly overhead, and it has incredibly sophisticated detection equipment on board that can detect up to basically a can of pop in the ocean. If it's spilled, this thing can detect. It's really quite amazing when you're flying at 500 knots at over 80,000 feet that we can do that. But it's incredibly sophisticated detection equipment. We run the plane. Environment Canada and Climate Change Canada actually provides the telemetry and the analysis of the data. Once a ship arrives in port, it undergoes a detailed compliance inspection by Transport Canada. Our inspectors go on board along with other nations. I've mentioned the Port State Control Program, but essentially we have standardized risk and inspection programs across the other countries that are subscribed to this regime. So I see I'm out of time, but basically, we do this inspection, we share the results, it informs our risk basis, it's how we proceed, and it's a fairly sophisticated regime. Very quickly, because I know I'm out of time, but just on where I suspect we're going to have a more detailed conversation on anchorages and Q&A, but it's important to note that in maritime law, there's lots of words that float around in verbs with respect to anchorages: create, identify, establish. The public right of navigation is a common law right, and as such, it can only be restricted by act of Parliament. So, in other words, ships may navigate and anchor wherever they choose, so long as it is in a safe manner. If it's unsafe, we can take steps to prohibit it. But ships have a common law right to navigate, which includes the right to anchor, unless there are explicit rules otherwise, such as shipping lanes or collision regulations or specific traffic control measures. And Canada is circumscribed to some extent in its ability to impose those things because of participation in broader international conventions. So that right is an integral part of navigation. What we're here to talk about is how we can provide greater oversight to it to address the range of concerns that we know are out there and ensure that it's as safe as secure as possible. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. As someone pointed out, I am a Gulf Island boy. I spent most of my life working on and around the ocean, almost in my 40th year in the industry. I care very deeply about it. And listening to you all, your letters, your notes, it struck me how badly we've served you, and that we haven't notified you and shared with you what we're trying to do to make it a better place, how we're trying to look after our business. Inside of the regulatory regime identified by Transport Canada and the work that's been done by the Port of Vancouver, which is exceptional work. And technologically, it's just been exceptional. But we haven't shared that with you. You don't know what we're doing. And I first started to experience that when I worked at BC Ferries. And I'll never forget my first ferry advisory committee. I was a freshly minted senior master, very proud of my work, but it wasn't perceived as well as what I've been doing. So what I'm hoping to do moving forward in my port is work better, to talk with you, to share with you, to listen to you, and hear what your concerns are. Yes, we are a federal government. We are mandated to protect trade. We look after safety, security, and environmental management. I'm very good at that. I've been trained to do it my whole life. But what I'm learning to do is listen to the people who are around us and try to find a way to talk to you so you understand what it is we're trying to do. We have the 5th largest estuary in British Columbia inside of our port. We have reduced log storage. We have doubled eelgrass. We have actual credits in the bank with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for the restorative reclaiming work we've done. We actually have significant returns in the Nanaimo River based on the work we've done in the estuary. The port walkway is paid for by the port. It's put in place to manage and protect public access to the water, enhance the marine environment, and reduce industrial pollution as a legacy of 100 years of activity. Inside of all that, we still have to manage trade. We don't have the complexities of Vancouver. We basically do 1/10 their trade, 1/10 their ships, but we also have less than 1/10 their resources. So it's a hard job to do. So we've looked at using technology to manage looking after our marine environment in a better way to meet the needs of the islanders. So I have a neighborhood that's on an island inside of my port, Protection Islanders. They are a suburb of the city of Nanaimo. They do not have a fixed link to Nanaimo, but they pay taxes and have expectations they're going to have the same services that any other neighborhood would have. I, as a federal entity, am in an unusual situation of bridging that gap, and it has been a real experience for me to enter into municipal politics as a simple boat driver. So we've come up with some innovative ways of sharing firefighting equipment with the federal asset and putting in municipal firefighters on our patrol boats. We provide the police and ambulance transportation. We listened to what they said and changed our anchorages so that we didn't stack the vessels. We had a very efficient way of managing from a shipping perspective, but it created blocked view corridors. So we moved things around, worked with the pilots, worked with the shipping companies, and we opened up those corridors so people could have their view back. There is a ship in front of it, but we respect and try to compromise and work with them. We've changed the work requirements for ships. We don't let them use growlers. We've changed the landing requirements. We do very rigorous inspections for ballast water management. We've put in place a third-party monitoring to make sure there's no invasive species. We have third-party monitoring of water quality, U.S. Geological Survey. So we are trying to be transparent and open and share with you, the general public, our efforts to protect the environment. It's a balance. That all costs money, and we have to make money by the port. Federal ports do not receive funding from the federal government. They don't receive it from municipalities. They don't receive it from the province. They receive it from the throughput of the ships traveling to the port. We actually send money to Ottawa. We don't receive money from Ottawa. We work for the federal government, but we're not of the federal government. It's a complicated dance which requires us to approach you, the general public, and get social license. Because we need your permission. We have rules. We have authority. But in today's world, it's not enough to have the right to do something. You need to have the permission to do something. And that's what our port is trying to get, is permission, acceptance, and partnership to move forward and build a better marine industry that is reflective of the public's need, the country's need, the environment's need, and meet our international obligations. It's probably going to be easier for me to answer your questions than try to tell you what we're doing. But I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to put a face to who's running the port. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to, I literally wrote my speaking points as I was sitting there because I think it's important to be very blunt, right to the point so that we have an engaged Q&A session. So I'm going to tell you what I've heard and learned in 3 months on the job. The first one are assumptions coming here. Concerns from your community. Pollution, spill response, anchorages, accumulated impact of the environment, which I think was well covered in the first presentation, governance, process, and consultation. There's probably others, but those are the ones that I've heard loudly and clearly. In addition, growth and industrial development. So those are the assumptions I come here with. I'll talk briefly about industry, communities, First Nations, government, and what I think are opportunities and timeframes. So first with the industry, I think it's probably well covered, and I know if you've looked out your front yard or your backyard, you're seeing less ships. Commercially, it's probably as bad as it's ever been, and hopefully as bad as it'll ever get. That comes from low commodity prices globally, too many ships in the world, and a downward trend on the freight rates that shippers can charge, ship owners can charge companies that need to ship products. So that recovery is not going to happen quickly, and there's a reason why I'm bringing it up, and it'll come out in a little bit. Industry is not all Canadian, as you can imagine. It's about 20% domestic trade, 80% international trade. So the people that I deal with and you deal with come from different parts of the world. So that's a factor that I think is important to consider. Talk about communities and First Nations. It's been very clear to me, and I think it's pretty clear to most people in the industry and government, engagement is a big concern for a lot of people. A lot of people feel that their voices are not heard or listened to, and there's a difference. Processes may be not as robust as they could be. So some people have access to process, some people don't. And I would say one other piece I've sort of put together myself is there are a lot of different stakeholders with lots of different ideas about how to solve something. And I think that may be that might be constraining us somewhat from finding solutions. The government needs to close their ears for 2 seconds. Government. Changing government, huge change in political philosophy, which I think probably a lot of people are quite positive about. Huge mandate from the current federal government, and that is, I don't know if you find it hard to keep up, we find it hard to keep up as an industry with the amount of change and consultation that's happening. And that's, I think, pressures on communities, I think it's pressures on industry, I know it's pressures on government, and I'd be surprised to hear anybody in Transport Canada or the Coast Guard that's saying that they're not working long days and hours, because they are, I know they are. And that's a challenge. And Transport Canada, I think, is probably one of the most strained departments. I mean that politely. But there's a lot of pressures on Transport Canada to do a lot of things very quickly. So that's a factor, I think, that is important for us to consider. Finally, I'll talk about some of what I think are positive opportunities. We've been giving a couple of opportunities. Number one, commercially, the industry is in the doldrums. So you're seeing less ships. It's a good time to think about what's not working and to try and fix it. But that window of opportunity is quite short in my mind. We work on the assumption that the federal government is now in the sort of data collection phase of their mandate. They're doing a lot of listening. They'll probably listen until the summertime, and then the bureaucrats are going to work very hard this summer, figuring out what they should be advising their political masters, and probably in the world of cabinet, they'll be making decisions this fall. So as an industry, those are the assumptions we work on. And I don't know if he's nodding behind me or not, but
I can neither confirm nor deny.
but those are the assumptions we work on. So, you know, as we look at potential places where we can provoke positive change, that's a pretty tight timeline. So there's a lot going on. Trade is down. So again, that's an opportunity to look at what hasn't worked in the past and how to fix it. Now the last point I want to say, and I want to really focus on the Q&A session because I think it's probably the most important thing, is there are a lot of initiatives happening in different departments. And for those of you, you're probably all very aware of it, National Marine Conservation Area Reserves, marine protected areas, moratoriums, they're all connected to some way or another governance on the water. And I think trying to work our way through these in a pragmatic fashion is really the challenge that faces all stakeholders and First Nations, the province and the federal government, to see where they're connected. And I'm not sure which one is better than the other. I'm not an expert at it, but I know lots of people that are experts, and probably some of you here in the room. But we need to figure out how that best achieves positive outcomes. And I'm not sure any statutory, existing statutory authority is the perfect one. They all have some pros and cons, and I think it's important that we try and figure out what's better. We've heard from Minister LeBlanc that he intends to open up the Oceans Act. So he said that last week on Oceans Day. It might be a window of opportunity to actually find some solutions. I think as an industry, we're really focused on the term marine spatial planning because we don't see that any one of those acts that governs protection and balancing stakeholder needs is the perfect solution. They were all designed for different reasons decades ago, so they may not be serving today's demand and today's expectations by communities, First Nations, industry, and the public. So I think there's probably some need to focus on some other solutions. And there's some great examples in the US and elsewhere in the world that talk about marine spatial planning and bring all the stakeholders to the table with a common objective. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I look forward to your challenging questions. Thanks very much.